Hello and welcome to week 3 of Baptist History and Distinctives, and I'm going to give you an overview of what I would like you to study this week. Your slides that you are to study are found there in your weekly folder, so refer to those as far as what to study. Now, in week 3, we'll see how Baptists were established in America. The Baptist movement began in Europe, in England, and in Holland, but as immigrants came over from England, particularly England and Europe, and immigrated to the United States, they brought with them Baptist beliefs, and there were Baptist churches established here in America. Also, the Baptist movement arose spontaneously, I believe, as a movement of the Lord here in America too, through people like Roger Williams, and you'll be studying that as you study in your studies this week. And I want you to be aware of how Baptists began. But I want you to be aware that Baptists began in New England, how that Roger Williams founded the first Baptist church in America in 1639 in what is now the city of Providence, Rhode Island. So Baptists began in Rhode Island and Providence in 1639. And shortly after that, other Baptist churches were founded in Newport, Rhode Island. I want you to be aware of that and who established that church there, churches in Rhode Island. Churches began to be established also in other areas of New England, like Massachusetts, and there were Baptist churches established in a couple of cities there, particularly like Boston, the First Baptist Church of Boston that was begun shortly after that. I want you to be aware that the Baptist Church was founded in Maine, and be aware of that and how that began. So be aware of how the Baptist churches, the Baptist movement began here in the United States, and be aware also about what happened to Roger Williams, how that he became convinced through his own personal study of the Scripture of Baptist principles, particularly the issue of baptism and requiring believers' baptism by immersion and no infant baptism. That ran afoul of the teaching and beliefs of the established Congregational Church there in New England. And Williams ran into conflict with that and was almost arrested there in New England because of that. And he fled to Providence, what is now Providence, Rhode Island, and founded the colony of Providence, Rhode Island, which became the state of Rhode Island. Be aware of that and that history there, and be aware of how that Williams advocated for religious liberty in America. Be aware of ministers like John Clark, who also established the Newport Church, as I mentioned. They're one of the earliest churches. Swansea, Massachusetts, where one of the first Baptist churches was founded here in America there in Massachusetts. And John Miles, who founded that church in what year. Be aware of the Baptist church being founded in Boston by Thomas Gold. Also in Maine by William Screven. Be aware of that church being founded there. And be aware of him, key early Baptist leader. And so in your studies, I want you to be aware also that the Baptist movement began there in New England, particularly in Rhode Island, spread to Massachusetts, spread to Maine, and then it moved from there down into the middle colonies, particularly in Pennsylvania. And I want you to be aware that how that William Penn and his colony of Pennsylvania provided a safe haven for Baptists with religious liberty where they could go, establish Baptist churches, and practice the Baptist faith. And so the Baptist church was established and grew in Pennsylvania, the colony Pennsylvania. Be aware of that and how that grew in that area. And be aware of leaders like Elias Keach, who was a very key early Baptist leader here in America and helped establish a Baptist in Pennsylvania, particularly by establishing a Baptist church in the community of Pennapeck, Pennsylvania, which is near Philadelphia. Also, he was a great evangelist, evangelized many people, and I want you to be particularly aware and learn how that he was instrumental in getting churches established there across Pennsylvania that would come and have meetings that eventually evolved into the Philadelphia Baptist Association. And so be aware of how Keach was instrumental in forming the Philadelphia Baptist Association, a very key early Baptist leader in colonial America. So be aware of him and what happened there in Pennsylvania. And then Baptists moved from New England and in the middle colonies down into the South, and be aware of how Baptist work was established here in the South. And it began with Baptist churches being established in the southern colonies of South Carolina first, And then Baptist churches became established in North Carolina, Virginia, colonies like that. So be aware of how that was established. Be aware of how the First Baptist Church of Charleston, South Carolina was established, which is considered the mother church of the Southern Baptist Convention, how that William Screven came from the Baptist church, he and his congregation up here in Maine that he established back there in the 18th century, and he immigrated down to Charleston, South Carolina with his congregation in 1696. They're establishing a Baptist church, which he had founded back up in Maine in 1682, but they immigrate down in 1696 to South Carolina to Charleston, establish a Baptist church there, and that became the mother church of the Southern Baptist Convention, a very important historic church, the First Baptist Church of Charleston, South Carolina. So be aware of that. Be aware of how other Baptist churches were established in the southern colonies. Be aware of what Baptists agreed and disagreed over here in America, particularly over issues like Benjamin Keach and introducing hymn singing, issues of laying on of hands and things like that. There were controversies that arose among Baptists here in the early Baptists, so be aware of those controversies and what leaders were involved in that. Also, be aware of how that Baptists in England in the 18th century were affected by change that occurred there, and be aware of those changes, what caused that. Be aware of revival there in England, how that affected that. And also be aware that it's interesting that in England there was a decline among Baptists in the first half of the 18th century. Be aware of the spiritual decline of the general Baptist and what happened to them, and how that some of those churches went into liberalism. Be aware of how hyper-Calvinism impacted the particular Baptist there in England, also in the 18th century, particularly the first half and mid-18th century. So be familiar with that. And be familiar with how Dan Taylor was used of God to revive General Baptists there in England through the New Connection movement. Know about Dan Taylor and the New Connection movement, the years that was involved there in his renewal of the General Baptist. Be aware also of particular struggles in the Baptist in England among the particular Baptists. Thank you very much.